Esainai el heharim me'ayin yavo Ezri. Esainai el heharim me'ayin yavo Ezri. Ezri me'im Adonai Osei shamayim va'aretz. Ezri me'im Adonai Osei shamayim va'aretz. Aiten lamod raglecha ayanum shomrecha. Hine lo yanum velo yishan shomer Yisrael. Adonai shomrecha, Adonai tzilcha, al yad yeminecha. Adonai shomrecha, Adonai tzilcha, al yad yeminecha. Yom hashemesh lo yakeka ve'yareach balayla. Adonai yishmorcha mikora, Yishmor et nafshecha. Adonai yishmor tzedcha uvoecha me'ata ve'ad olam. Adonai yishmor tzedcha uvoecha me'ata ve'ad olam. Al mekoma tavo v'shalom. Shir Lama'alot, a song for those who ascend. Esainai harim me'ayin yavo Ezri. I turn my eyes to the mountains. From where will my help come? My help comes from Adonai, from God, maker of heaven and earth. God will not let your foot give way, your guardian will not slumber. You see, the guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. God is your guardian, your protection at your right hand. By day the sun will not strike you, nor the moon by night. God will guard you from all harm. God will guard your life. God will guard your going and coming, now and forever. May our beloved Myra Wolch go unto God in peace. Hatzur tamim paulo kichol rakav mishpat el emunah ve'inav el tzadik v'yashar hu tzadik atadonai lamidu lahachayot asher b'yadcha pikaron kol ruchot chalila lechazirchonenu limchot v'yihiyu nainecha v'rachamim aleinu v'kuchot ki lecha adon harachamim v'haslichot. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam dayan hayemet. Praised are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who is the judge of truth. Adonai natan v'Adonai lakach, Yishem Adonai mevorach, v'hu mechaper avon v'lo yashchit, v'irba l'shiva po v'lo ya'ir kol chamato, v'yashov v'afar la'aretz shehaya, v'aruach tashuv el ha'Elohim asher netana. The dust returns to the earth as it was, but the spirit returns to God who gave it. May Myra's soul be bound up in the bond of life eternal, and may God, Adonai, send comfort to those who mourn and grant strength to those whose burden is sorrow. Thank you to all of you who have tuned in from all over the world to join your hearts together with those in Myra Wolch's family, as today we honor, celebrate her, and lay her to rest. Myra Wolch, Mariam Rachel bat Gershon Ubrindel, the daughter of Gordon Kleiman and Bertha Schneer, Zichronam Livracha, of blessed memory. Myra passed away Monday evening, the 13th day in the Hebrew month of Shvat. She was 87. She is lovingly remembered and celebrated today and always going forward by her children, Sarah and Julian, Mark and Sandra, and Jonathan, by her grandchildren, Ari and Jackson, and by her family through her longtime partner, Saul Cherniak, Zichrono Livracha, of blessed memory, children, Howard and Lori, Lori and Bee, grandchildren, Katie and Grant, Jenny and Matthew, and great-grandchildren, Isaac, Oliver, and Sybil. Sarah, Mark, and Jonathan have all written eulogies they will each share today. Sarah's to be read by Lori. And they will pay tribute to their mother and help us all today in the difficult, the painful, but important process of bestowing the highest form of respect our Jewish tradition has to offer to someone who has passed, but also to help all of us in saying goodbye. With that in mind, as I hand things over to our eulogies and the hesped portion of our service, I do that by offering this poem from the celebrated Jewish poet Chana Senesh. There are stars up above, so far away we only see their light long, long after the stars themselves are gone. And so it is with people we love. Their memories keep shining brightly, though their time with us is done. But the stars that light up the darkest night, these are the lights that guide us. As we live our days, these are the ways we remember.
Myra was a loving and devoted member of our family and was much loved by our family, including those who have passed on and those who survive her. We will miss her. I'm privileged to be able to read her daughter Sarah's eulogy. This is not how it was supposed to be. Mom in hospital, then dying during a pandemic. Me in Toronto. No holding hands, no being together till the end. We had FaceTime or phone calls, but over time even they seemed to amplify the distance. This was not how it was supposed to be. For nearly 50 years, Mom and I called each other all the time. That's how we connected between our visits, how we kept our worlds close. As long as my kids are happy, she'd say, that's all that matters. Our mom was the apple of her father's eye. She was his sunshine, his only sunshine. She made him happy all the time. And she always knew her daddy, Gordon Kleiman, loved her unconditionally. Her mom, Bertha, was the eldest of 12, the Schneers. Nana, as Mom always said, had a real zest for life, and she filled Mom's life with family. Doting aunties and uncles, beloved first cousins, and the whole magnificent Schneer-Bernstein clan They became the siblings that Mum never had. Her Uncle Allie, of blessed memory, was only 5 years older than Mum. She was his honey, and he was like her older brother, fiercely protective and always there to show her the way. When they were kids, Allie built Mum a treehouse, even pulling up a hose so she'd have running water when she washed her dolly's dishes. And more recently, their time at Seven Oaks Hospital overlapped. Uncle Allie died there only 7 weeks and 3 days before her. Our Mum was born and raised in Regina, but she lived most of her life in Winnipeg. She moved here in 1950 to go to university, living with Auntie Esther and her family. The next year, she got married. Mum was 18. Mum was very smart and glamorous. She was an avid reader, CBC radio aficionado, cruciverbalist, that's her crossword puzzle enthusiast, an exacting editor of our letters. She loved classical music, Jacques Brel, Monet's water lilies, and the theater. She was a great cook and baker, a hostess with the mostest, as Auntie Babe used to say. Mum was also an accomplished home decorator who favored the colors black and white and emerald green. Talking politics was her favorite and only sport. The love of her life was her second partner, Saul Cherniak, his kids and their partners, his granddaughters, Katie and Jenny and their partners, as well as his great-grandchildren, Isaac, Oliver, and Sybil, brought her endless joy, as did her dear friend, the late Sybil Cherniak. As for Mark, Jonathan, and me, we each have our different memories of our Mum. Mine was the 1950s Mum, guiding a daughter who was coming of age in the late 60s and early 1970s. You need to have a life, she'd tell me. In one way or another, she'd been saying that since I was a little girl. I remember watching the stars, just the two of us, from the big bedroom window at Falcon Lake, or the reflection of the moon on the water as we snuggled up under the covers, both of us looking at that great big world out there. Thunderstorms were our favorite. Don't be scared, she'd say, no matter how loud the thunder rumbled. Mum was always very strong, though she once told me she didn't feel that brave inside. She kept her focus and she carried on, her oldest and dearest friends by her side. Mum loved each of her kids in her own, very own way. Mark is such a fine man, she'd tell me again and again, and from the very beginning, Jonathan's been the light of her life. Mum loved her grandsons, Ari and Jackson, so very deeply too. She was their Maiwa, and she quelled when she talked about them to everyone. Same with her grand dog, Simon. She loved her Sandra and her Julian as if they were her own, often saying how kind and considerate Sandra is and so good for her son, and what immense Julia is. Every year on his birthday, she told him he was her favorite son-in-law, to which he'd reply, "But I'm your only son-in-law," and every year they'd laugh and laugh. I miss you, Mum, a lot. And yes, I spelled a lot with 2 words. And not to worry, I'll tell cousin Sarah Cadenzer that she's, as you'd say, a very fine human being, as well as a compassionate and brilliant doctor. Thank you, Sarah, for being at Mum's bedside every single time you were on shift, and for guiding us with your wisdom, insight, and love. Thank you to Cindy St. Hilaire of Blossom Senior Care, and to the caregivers and staff at Blossoms who were so good to Mum, especially Marilyn Roldan. Thank you, Marilyn, for your gentle presence and your kindness, and along with our dear Katie Cherniak and dear brother Mark, for being with Mum so lovingly all those days at the end. Heartfelt thanks to Dr. Susan Robillard and Dr. Kathy Picard, Mum's longtime family doctors, and to Dr. Peter Bialy, the nurses and the staff at the Seven Oaks General Hospital. And as always, thank you, Lynn Feynman. Aleha HaShalom. Peace be upon you, Mum. I will think of you every night when I look up at the stars. With love.
One of my earliest memories is riding around with Mum in a family Studebaker while we did errands together. To make our outings fun, Mum would help me collect Edsels. The Ford Edsel was one of the strangest looking cars ever. It was supposed to be Ford's crowning achievement of the 1950s, but instead became one of the biggest marketing flops in history. With their big ugly fins, boat-like appearance, and distinctive round grills, Edsels were often featured and ridiculed in Mad magazine, which I loved,
and which Mum would buy for me every month. Having only been built for 2 years, Edsels were quite rare, and because they were so easy to spot, finding one in real life while I was riding around with Mum was one of the biggest thrills of my childhood. When I spotted one, I would shout out my accomplishment to Mum, "Edsel!" and Mum would share in my delight as if she was just as excited as I was. I think she even drove out of her way sometimes, just so we could spend some extra time together, and I was more than willing to oblige. Yes, mine was just your simple, ordinary, perfect childhood. Mum loved Falcon Lake, and every summer we'd head there as soon as the school year finished. We'd stay at the lake until Labor Day, leaving only for the occasional trip to Kenora to go to A&W or Dairy Queen. If it was rainy, Mum might take us to the fish hatchery at Ingolf. Mum would take an ordinary outing and turn it into an indelible memory. Every Wednesday, we'd go play bingo at the old curling club. In the evening, sometimes we'd head to the garbage dump and watch the black bears rummaging through the garbage. Mum would take an ordinary sandwich and make it into something special. She would gently cajole an egg into stillness and present a fried egg sandwich that was truly sublime. One day she brought a whole tray of egg sandwiches and a pitcher of freshly stirred chocolate milk down to the dock. As we were about to dig in, a squirrel came out of nowhere and made off with half a sandwich. From that day on, a fried egg sandwich and a glass of chocolate milk had become squirrel's lunch. When she had a few minutes to relax, Mum loved to tan and cool off with a swim. With her gorgeous face, bronze tan, designer sunglasses, and a fashionable scarf tied around her flaming red hair, Mum was a European movie star. You could easily picture her strolling the Riviera with Audrey Hepburn or Sophia Loren. Did I say that Mum made food special? Even now I can taste her perfect cheese balances. Not too sweet, lovingly rolled, cooled, and gently nudged into golden brown perfection. Add sour cream and just a touch of salt and pepper. Jonathan and I would have contests to see how many blintzes we each could eat, and Mum would lovingly oblige. Heaven on earth. Or Shabbat dinner, medium rare roast beef, perfectly browned oven-baked potatoes, popovers, gravy. But for Mum, food wasn't just a sensory delight. It was first and foremost a social thing, a reason to get together with her loved ones. Every Rosh Hashanah and every Pesach, she would start cooking 6 weeks or more before the sacred event and fill her freezer. Cooking for her family on a simcha was one of her greatest pleasures, but we were the beneficiaries. Tender oniony brisket, chicken in any of 10 or 20 delicious forms, sweet kugel, unsweet kugel, anti-babes gefilte fish, honey cake, and more, and more. Mum's honey cake is legendary. And then there were her brownies and her toffee. Everyone in the family loved Myra's toffee. Sometimes, without any warning, Uncle Ali, of blessed memory, would call her in his car phone, 100 years before anyone had a cell, and he'd announce, "My, I'm coming over to pick up some toffee." Ali would tell her that the sweet caramely treat was to die for. Mum would politely correct him. "No, Ali, it's to live for." In the 1980s, Mum spent a couple of years working with Ali to stage houses that he would buy and sell. Even though she had no formal training, Mum had a designer's eye and could make something out of nothing on a shoestring budget. Around this time, Mum thought about writing a book or a series of articles on food and entertaining. Mum worked on her book for a few weeks before telling herself, "No, there's no market for this." Looking back, it would be interesting to hear Martha Stewart's thoughts on that one. Mum loved the CBC. There was a small clock radio in our kitchen, and the dial never budged from 990. We used to call it the CBC radio. She was so proud of Sarah and her career there. Sarah was so prolific. Not everyone knows she was stationed in Newfoundland for a time, and later became the TV anchor of a national news show for kids called What's New. At the end of each show, there was a quiz. The quiz featured someone or something that was in the news that week, and it was always in the form of a poem. Mom wrote several quiz poems for the show, so for one of her birthdays, I wrote a quiz poem for her. If you don't recognize my flaming pate, add 40 score when on Oak Street to 8. My stories and food, they never will tire ya. Please guess my last name. First, it is Myra. Mom loved wordplay, and after reading the paper cover to cover, she'd quickly finish the crosswords. I say crosswords because on the weekend, she'd warm up with Thomas Joseph, 5 minutes, move on to Frank Longo, maybe an hour, and cap it off with Will Shortz and the Times crossword, finished in 2 hours at most. How she ever found time to read is beyond me, but she was one of the most literate and well-read people I've ever known. It used to drive me crazy when she would correct my grammar, but now I'm really glad she did. Hopefully, this is the last time I'll ever start a sentence with a dangling adverb. Mom used to tell us that she had eyes in the back of her head. I'm not sure about Sarah or Jonathan, but I truly believed that if I parted her hair at the back of her head, I would actually find a second pair of eyes. The one time I decided to skip out of evening school at Roma, Mom drove by and caught me. Apparently, she didn't just have eyes in the back of her head, she had eyes all around and could see 360 degrees like a fly. One thing for which I'll always be grateful is that Mom was my gateway to the colorful and gigantic Schneer family. She passed on many of its immortal sayings to me. For example, Bertha, isn't everybody glad? Or, I'm cold, put on a sweater. Babe, did you read that literature in the paper this morning? Or, it's raining very hard today, it's a real drownpour. And then there was Allie's famous double oi. Oi! Oi! Something really exceptional, might even rate a triple. Mom loved all of her aunties, uncles, and cousins, and she could tell you something about everyone in the family tree. On weekends, we would have fried matzah in the late morning, and in early afternoon, there'd be show tunes booming from the hi-fi. Mom loved all the classics of the 50s and 60s, and she knew all the songs from all of them. West Side Story, My Fair Lady, The King and I, Camelot, Oliver, Cabaret, and of course, Fiddler on the Roof. She would hum, sing, and even do little drum beats with her hands. She was a tremendous patron of the arts for decades. She loved it all, symphony, opera, ballet, theater. Her favorite of all was the WSO Masterworks series, and when she'd take off her coat and get comfortable in her plush red seat, she'd take a deep breath and say, now I'm in my happy place. I remember seeing some incredible shows with Mom at the concert hall. Marcel Marceau, Monty Python, the Irish Rovers, only to name a few. Wow. Mom also loved babies and often wondered how they could eventually turn into such unpleasant things. She displayed a famous poster for Kodak color film on the wall in her office. It had 15 babies seated on a blanket all in a row. All different flavors, as she would say. She could instantly tell you what any of her grandkids, nephews, or nieces was up to. She would put on her best baby voice and quote verbatim the latest funny thing each of them had said. When Mom went grocery shopping, she would see a cute kid sitting in a shopping cart and approach the mom just so she could get a better look. What aisle do you get those in? She would ask. On Sunday, we'd often go for Chinese food, and I've now come to realize that while I was there for the food, Mom was also there so she could see the babies that were there and try to get a hold, as she would say. When Mom lived alone in the house, she would charm every worker that came by. Painters, gardeners, and cleaners would come in for coffee and would be happy to take half an hour or more out of their workday to update Mom on their families and listen to Mom's stories. Mom knew all their family members by name and what they were up to. Sometimes contractors would even drop by on a day off just to have coffee with her. Mom always kept in regular touch with her many friends and relatives. She was vibrant, vivacious, and an instant party. Just invite Myra, and you knew the party would take off. And if all that wasn't enough, Mom was incredibly devoted to her mom and tended dearly to her to the ripe old age of 80. That is to say, Myra was 80. Bertha was 105 at this point. Mom always felt blessed to have shared her later years with Saul. It was a new lease on life for her, and we are forever grateful to Saul and the Cherniak family. When Saul passed at the tender age of 101, it really seemed to take the wind out of Mom's sails. But we're forever grateful she was able to spend so many wonderful years with him. Mom, I don't know if there's a heaven, but if I ever get there, I know you'll be waiting. I hear the WSO plays a new concert every day. We'll go to the Sunday Pops again, and maybe we can even collect an Edsel or two along the way.
I have some things that I prepared, but before I start, I have a few short thank yous. And I want to add my appreciation and thanks to Marilyn and the staff at Blossoms, to the staff at Seven Oaks Hospital, especially a woman named Bonnie McIntosh, who literally moved heavens and earth to give me a chance to sit with Mom at the end. This stranger, Dr. Sarah Credenzer, who appears to have a unique practice dedicated exclusively to her cousins and family, and makes a hobby of seeing other patients in her abundant spare time. To my big brother Mark and his wife Sandy, they've carried an incredible load, caring for Mom both before and especially during COVID. My cousin and de facto other brother, Maury Schneer, who has been keeping me fed and has been my own personal Uber driver to and from the airport in Toronto these past few weeks, and he's been my shoulder when I needed one. When I told Maury that he's been the duct tape holding me together, he simply smiled, said, "Yeah, it's a big role." Maury's sister, my cousin Nola Lazar, also had a packaged meal prepared, waiting, and sitting on the steps at Oak Street when I first flew into Winnipeg a couple of weeks ago, before my plane had left the tarmac in Toronto. I just want to thank all of you. It's been incredibly difficult and important. Second, I want to share some very meaningful ideas Myra had around death itself. Mom taught us the importance of community, family, and tradition before we could walk. And she had some very touching ideas. She had some very touching ideas about visiting graves and yurtsite on the anniversary of a loved one's passing. She did neither. She would always say, "Do you miss them more when you're there or then?" I carry them with me always, in my heart, wherever I am and every day. For her, death was always about life, about being part of a Shiva, feeding anything and everything that moved, being there for the people you love, and keeping the memory of the departed alive through stories and example. Okay. Now, likely none of you can see the pages I'm reading from, but they're all typed in green ink. For anyone that was lucky enough to receive a letter, a birthday card, or a Hanukkah card from Myra, especially in the 70s and 80s, they would have likely seen her signature written in green ink. She wrote all her lists, signed checks, gave parental permission, you name it, she signed it in green ink. In fact, it drove us kids nuts because whenever we'd reach for a pen, there was always an ample supply of green, flare, felt tip markers, medium only, but you could never find a blue ballpoint when you needed one. And a word about her signature. For those she loved, and she loved everyone so joyously, she signed JET'M, It's pronounced Je t'aime, French for I love you. And also, it roughly translates from the French into I am here for you, M. That little pun is in many ways all you need to know about Myra. She was always there for you, and she loved you. Our mother loved words. She loved to write them. She loved to assemble them on a Scrabble board. She loved to use them. In fact, she loved to make sure that we use them correctly too from a very young age. Sarah had her letters from BB camp marked up in red ink and returned to her while still at camp with corrections. Mark and I would cringe, and I really mean cringe, when any of our friends used to use the word hopefully within earshot of Mom, because we knew what was likely coming. I can still hear her gently correcting us, our friends, our girlfriends, our wives, her grandchildren, plumbers, handymen, cabinet ministers. It didn't matter. Mark, you want to say it with me? He looked at her hopefully, as in filled with hope. That, she would say, is the only correct use of that word. Mom, I always think of you hopefully. Another of her favorites was, you bring something toward you, you take something away. But by far, her favorite words were unconditional love. She loved unconditionally. She loved fiercely when her kids were in trouble. She loved tenderly when she spoke about Saul or her grandchildren. She loved joyously when she spoke about family, the aunts, uncles, cousins that made sure that she was an only child in name only. And she loved us all unconditionally. A lot of greeting cards and self-help books use that phrase, but we were so lucky to have grown up knowing no other kind of love except our mother's unconditional love. To that, I need to add unconditional support and unconditional faith. She really believed, even when we didn't, that her kids could do almost anything. I remember the day I left home to move to Toronto. It was a gray Sunday morning, the Labor Day weekend 1984. And as Paul Burstein and I packed up the last of my things into a bursting U-Haul, I looked over to see her crying. I went to hug her and I said, Mom, don't cry. She looked up at me surprised and said, I'm not. I'm so happy for you. They were tears of joy, which can actually be read in two ways when you think about it. As I sat down to write this, I accepted the fact that I could never capture all of the joyous, funny, smart, worldly, and wonderful qualities that Mom had. I tried and I soon gave up. So instead, I want to share a few of the wonderful things she taught me, some directly, some by example, but all of them definitively Myra. Mom proudly referred to herself as a Saskatchewan girl. Born in Regina, she often wore a spike of wheat on her lapel. She was progressive in her politics well before that term regained its current prominence, and she proudly spoke of her support for the CCF before it became the NDP. She tells stories about her father, a pharmacist in Regina during the Depression, often accepted payment for medicines in butter and eggs when that was all a sick kid's farmer father could offer. However, what you may not have known is that our mom had a bit of a sliding scale when it came to certain progressive causes, like child labor. My first job was at the age of 4, and it lasted until I was about 10. It involved two things. First, many people watching will remember Stewart's fresh fruit and vegetables on Grant. Some of you will remember even further back when Stewart Sakima, a greengrocer from the Netherlands and the Stewart in Stewart's, had a red truck that cruised the back lanes of River Heights selling fresh fruit and vegetables one house at a time. I was too small to carry anything, but my job was to peek up at Stewart, standing in his truck like a giant, and try to con him out of a few of the small baskets that he used for strawberries and cherry tomatoes. Now, for illustration, what I'm talking about are these things. If he did, I could return victorious to the kitchen with my hard-won haul, but my duties did not end there. I was then seated at the kitchen table with two things, a roll of wax paper and a pair of scissors. My next job was to tear off 4-inch sheets of wax paper that I then had to cut into 3 equal-sized squares and pile them up. Now, I realize that some of you are wondering how it is possible that nobody called Amnesty International about this, but my work still wasn't finished. No, after slavishly tearing and cutting an entire roll of wax paper, the real work began. While I was doing my best to cut equal squares, Mum was busy working true alchemy. She was slaving away over a hot stove with a candy thermometer and what seemed like every cookie sheet in River Heights, making toffee. This strange scene was so common at 808 Oak Street, I didn't believe it when I was told that every mum didn't do this. When the sheets of toffee cooled, we got to work, wrapping each piece in its own square of wax paper. When there were enough, filling each of the baskets I'd scored off Stewart. Then each basket got its own card. Mazel tov on the new baby. Something sweet for someone sweet. Welcome to the neighborhood. Thinking of you. Just because. And for my long-suffering teachers at Ramah Elementary, thank you for putting up with my kid all year. All signed Je t'aime with a green, flare, felt tip marker, medium tip. On a few occasions, we went into commercial production. That was when there was a bar or bat mitzvah or a wedding of a really lucky friend or cousin. In that case, Myra ensured that every out-of-towner was met at their hotel with a basket of toffee of their very own. Now, I'm sorry to say, but if you only got toffee, you were a B-lister. It's true. If she really loved you, you got a pan of brownies. I recently learned that if she really, really loved you, you got a pan of brownies with the recipe. And if she really, really, really loved you, she told you to include coffee as the secret ingredient in the recipe. As a funny aside, about 15 years ago, Mark asked her, "Do you think we're old enough yet for you to include nuts in a batch of brownies?" It's true, she was worried that little kids might choke on pieces of nuts, so she didn't put them in her brownies. Until 2015. I was 40, and I'm the youngest. I can't count the valuable and wonderful things about life and living that our mom taught me. But one of her lessons by example that has had the most impact was about friendship. Myra had her birthday girls, a group that consisted of Penny Califf, Charna Averback, Mona Gray, and Mum. A collection of friends that have been close since they were kids, or they joke about the new friend they met, I think it was Penny, on their first day of university. Like clockwork, for over 40 years, I witnessed the birthday girls gather to celebrate each other's birthdays at some just-opened restaurant or swanky cafe. Later, Mum would come home and report on the events in everyone's lives and have just a little smile for the rest of the night. Years later, I have my own group of friends that I've known since kindergarten, some earlier, and there's even a new guy, because we met him around the time of our bar mitzvahs. We all grew up within blocks of each other here in Winnipeg and later moved to Toronto. We still meet as often as we can to share a meal, laugh, and just enjoy each other's company. I often think of Mom and her birthday girls when we get together. Speaking of friends who brought such joy into her life, I have to mention Sybil and Saul Cherniak. It was at their side that Mom saw, tasted, and marveled her way across the globe, getting the chance to see many of the places she'd only dreamed of visiting. It was their love and support, and later Saul's companionship, that really brought a smile to her face. But if you were to ask her what she really loved the most, she would say the grandchildren. So as an aside, Lori, Bea, Kate, Jenny, we all tried our best, but it really was Isaac, Oliver, and Sybil that really lit up her smile. In fact, upon discovering that baby Sybil had her own Instagram page, Mom drove Mark crazy by insisting that she get unlimited internet service. Now, it's hard for a boy to see his mom as anything other than his mother, but in my second year of U of T, Mirvish Productions staged Gigi, a stage version of the classic film, which has always been Myra's favorite movie. Except it was now 30 years after the film debuted, and the role of the wise, older Uncle Honoré, made famous by Maurice Chevalier singing Thank Heaven for Little Girls, was being played by Louis Jourdain, who was originally cast as Gaston, the film's dashing young playboy lead. I got us tickets and took Mom for a night at the theater. We had great seats and she sang every song. We waited for the crowd to thin before making our exit, which we did via the side door. And upon taking our first step outside, smashed directly into Louis Jourdain making his way out of the stage door. He was wearing a huge winter parka and tall winter boots. I thanked him for making this little girl very, very happy, pointing to a thoroughly starstruck Myra. He smiled widely, thanked us, and walked off to his waiting limo. I waved and turned to see my mother looking like one of the girls you see in the front row of old Beatles footage. She was smiling, speechless, and all she could say in a slight squeal was, "He's gorgeous!" There is so much more. Mom, you introduced me to Monty Python, Dave Allen, both Ronnies, all the Goons, and Peter Sellers. I'll never pass a cheese shop or a pet store without thinking of you and laughing. You were always interested in being interesting, and you encouraged me to be a critical thinker before I even knew what that meant. You always laughed with me and let me figure out who I was when neither of us had a clue. I want to end this on something I've been thinking about a lot these past few weeks. When I was very small and Mom would cuddle me, and I know she did the exact same with Sarah and Mark, she'd look down at me in her arms and in the most loving voice ask, "Do you feel secure?" She didn't gush too much about how she loved us, but she would playfully ask, "Do you feel secure?" It was, of course, rhetorical, because more than anything else, that is exactly how she made you feel. Secure in her love, secure in knowing she would always be there, secure in knowing how much she cared. Mom, you were my moral compass, the first person I always wanted to share good news with, and sometimes the only person I could confide in about gut-wrenching disappointments. You always made the hurt go away, made the impossible seem easy, and I always laughed, and you always laughed when I called you pretending to be a character out of Monty Python, or the Queen Mother, who, after a few too many gin and tonics, had reached a wrong number. Mom, you always made me feel secure, and I love you.
Let me just say a tremendous thank you to Sarah and Lori for reading those words, to Mark, and to Jonathan for 3 outstanding, funny, heartfelt, thoughtful, poignant, and beautiful eulogies that have paid tribute to this extraordinary woman we say goodbye to and lay to rest today. In Myra Wolch's honor, it's my honor to chant the El Malei Rachamim, the memorial prayer. El Malei Rachamim, Shochein Bamromim, Hamtzei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei Hashchina, B'malot Kedoshim Utehorim, Kezohar Rakia Mazhirim, Et Nishmat Maryam Rachel Bat Gershon Ubrindel Shelcha Leolama, Began Eidente Menuchata Anabal Harachamim Hastirei Aveseter Knafecha Leolamim Utzror Vitzror Achayim Enishmata Adonai Hu Nachalata V'tanuach V'shalom Al Mishkava V'nomar Amen. Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure to the soul of Myra Wolch, Maryam Rachel Bat Gershon Ubrindel, the daughter of Gordon and Bertha, who has gone to her eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that she find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May her soul be bound up in the bond of life. May she rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. I want to thank all of you again for tuning into this service, for joining your hearts together with the few of us who are here graveside. These are very difficult times, and so our familiar rituals of mourning, grieving, Shiva have been turned upside down. Luckily, we have technology to find ways to bridge the gap and keep us connected even in some different ways. And to that end, I encourage all of you to keep the phone calls, text messages, emails flowing as you share your memories, thoughts, and reflections with everyone in Myra's family. Earlier in the service, I offered the words of Job, the epitome in our tradition of suffering. Adonai natan v'Adonai lakach, Yehi Shem Adonai mevorach. God, you have given, God, you have taken away. Blessed be the name of God. May the memory of Myra Wolch be a blessing, as we mark that her essence will never leave our hearts and our souls. In conclusion, we turn now to the words of the mourner's Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon uvyomechon uv'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala uv'izman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mivorach le'alam u'lamei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'it hadar, v'it aleh, v'it halal, shemei dekudsha brichu. Leila min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav, hu yaseh shalom Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. May the one who creates peace and harmony on high bring peace and harmony to us, all Israel and all of humanity, as again we say, Amen. And to the family we say, Hamakom yinachem etchem b'toch sha'ar avelei Tzion v'Yerushalayim. May you be comforted and consoled among all those who are in mourning or who have ever been in mourning in our community. Thank you again for being with us today.